3 years ago, a Moroccan e-commerce startup went to every bank in the country looking for banking as a service. But none of these banks really knew what APIs were. So the founders went to the central bank, got a payment institution license, and built the entire infrastructure themselves. Today, I'm speaking with Ismael Belkhayat, CEO and co-founder of Chari. What started as a B2B marketplace for small retailers has become Morocco's first VC-backed fintech with a full payment institution license. They're backed by Y Combinator, Orange Ventures, and Rocket Internet. They built their own core banking system, card management, payment gateway, everything in-house. And now they're opening that infrastructure to third parties as a banking-as-a-service provider. We talk about why Moroccan banks couldn't deliver what they needed, what it actually takes to build a licensed fintech stack from scratch, how they're positioning both as a merchant, super app, and a BaaS provider, and why European fintechs should think about Morocco as their next market. My name is Lars Markull. I'm the founder of Embedded Finance Review, a newsletter, podcast, and event series covering the European embedded finance ecosystem. Every week, I help non-financial brands and fintech builders navigate the infrastructure landscape. And if you're working on an embedded finance project and want a free intro call to get feedback and meet the right providers and partners, head to embeddedfinancereview.com. And speaking of meeting the right people, we're hosting our next event in Berlin on April 15th as an official side event of FIBE. If you want to be in the room with the people building and buying embedded finance in Europe, details are on the website. And now, let's dive in. Hi, Ismael. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today, and in what part of the world are you located right now?
Hello, Lars. I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me. And I am today speaking out of Casablanca, Morocco.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And maybe a quick note for the listeners out there. A couple of weeks ago, I started the Office Hour feature in my newsletter where people can reach out to have a chat with me about the embedded finance project. And you, Ismael, were one of the first ones to reach out. We had a chat and I found it super interesting what you're building. I, to be honest, didn't know anything about Chari and what is happening in the Moroccan market. So I thought, let's do a podcast. So maybe a quick hint for everybody out there. If you're wondering, why is Ismael on the podcast and not me? Because Ismael did reach out. So feel free to do that. I cannot take everybody on the podcast, but if it's an interesting story like this, happy to have them.
Lars, I have to admit that I am a big fan of your newsletter and I read it whenever it hits my mailbox. So I'm really happy to be here with you today. And I'm really happy that I made the most of the opportunity this hour with you.
Very kind, Ismael. As you said, you're based in Morocco. You have built a couple of ventures in Morocco. Your current venture is Chari, and I would love to hear a little bit introduction from you. If I put in my own words, is you started a B2B e-commerce platform many, many years ago. Over time, this has evolved quite a bit, and today you're also offering embedded finance, banking as a service products. Maybe give us a quick intro. How did that journey evolve, and when did you realize that you want to get into the fintech offering?
Yes, indeed. We started in 2020 a B2B e-commerce platform for no-name independent retailers. You know, the small grocery stores that you find around the corners. In Morocco, there are millions of them. And in every developing countries, as you may expect, these guys are covering the fast-moving consumer goods market. When in Europe and more developed countries, it's usually the big chains and the big brands that are ubiquitous. Anyway, back in 2020, we were helping these shopkeepers with their procurement. Back at a time, if you remember, when investors were looking for fast-growing companies and everybody was only looking to top line. Fast forward in 2022, obviously things have changed and the same investors who were looking for top line started asking for unit economics and bottom line. And that's when we realized that B2B e-commerce was a very tough business model with thin margins, and we had to pivot to a model in which we could make more money. That's how we realized that we've had built trust with these small merchants, and that's when we started offering to them financial services.
Just to understand a little bit better, the B2B e-commerce platform, what kind of products were typically sold to this platform? Like literally anything, everything, or was it a focus on a specific industry?
Yeah, no, so we were what we call a one-stop shop. trying to offer to the small retailers all the goods they usually resell in their shops. So mainly manufactured goods from big brands such as Procter & Gamble, Nike. So when we realized that we've built trust with our existing clients, being the small grocery stores, we realized that we could at the same time provide them with financial services. So we decided to offer them a bundle that includes a POS terminal when they sell in their stores, but also a payment gateway when they say online, or even payment links when they sell through social networks. All the transactions that happen are settled on a bank account we open for them because we are at the same time an acquirer and an issuer. And on top of this, we provide them with a super app in which they can see all their transactions, in which they can provide to their end users bill payments, mobile top-up, insurance distribution, and at last but not least, we also provide them with debit cards.
Interesting. So just a follow-up question here. That means for your focus, your customer still remains the same shops as when you started in 2020. And would you say in 2022, that moment, would you describe it as a pivot, or was it more like a product extension where you understood like, okay, the core product still needs to be there, but we need to offer something else, which happened to be financial services?
It's a very good question. When we started, it started as an extension. So the B2B e-commerce was still a kind of Trojan horse to acquiring users and show them that we are able to provide them with a service they like. But we knew back then that profitability would be hard to get. So progressively over time, we started offering more and more fintech services until our users started focusing more on our fintech offering than the B2B e-commerce. As of today, we still have some B2B e-commerce, but it's not anymore what we do the best. Last part of the story is when we built the super app and all the fintech services, we realized that we had to build everything internally, and that, of course, the costs of the back office was quite high. So that's when we decided to start opening our rails and infrastructure to other kind of clients that are now using us as a banking as a service.
Interesting. A couple of things to unpack. Maybe first one, a comment when you say that your focus is not so much on financial services at all. When I hear things like this always brings me back to this quote, and I'm not remembering his name, unfortunately, but the CEO of Toast, obviously, I think most of the listeners will know Toast from the US, providing restaurant software and also adding financial services. In the podcast on 20 Minutes with C or 20 VC with Harry Stebbings, he said something like, I think it was like, our customers come for us for the technology, for the product, but we monetize them through financial services. So he kind of said like nobody really comes to us because they want to consume financial services. They come to us for something else. In that case, the software for restaurants to do the bookings, to do the whole vertical software play. But at the end of it, monetizing, they hardly do through that. That's all happening through financial services.
Exactly. Myself, I keep saying that B2B e-commerce is a terrible business when it comes to unit economics, but it's an amazing business to keep acquiring new users. So sometimes you need to use a business as a Trojan horse to convince users to trust you and try your services. And then you bring on top of your existing services, other services that they wouldn't have anyway, and that end up being the real use cases that are profitable.
Interesting. And let's go back to the moment where you made the decision, or maybe a little bit after you made the decision to offer financial services. I'm sure maybe you can explain a little bit when you when we're exploring the options, okay, what kind of financial services can we offer? Does it make sense? You probably went out and looked in the local market, maybe spoke to the regulator, maybe spoke to a couple of banks. What was the situation back then? And I think you indicated already that eventually you decided to build everything, if not all of it, in-house and also acquiring your own license. Maybe you can walk us through why did you do these decisions and what was the situation a couple of years ago when you were looking to get started?
Of course, let me start with the first use case we started with. And then I will try to explain to you why we've decided to do it in-house and not use an existing player. So the first use case is very specific to developing countries. And let me explain why. Because you guys in Europe and in Western countries, you all have mobile phones with a plan, in the sense that you get a subscription, you consume, and by the end of the month, you receive your bill and you pay the bill. In developing countries such as Morocco, but in Africa in general, it's the other way around. The way it works is you get an eSIM or a SIM card and you top it up in advance before being able to consume it. It's called prepaid versus postpaid. You guys are in a postpaid mode. We are in a prepaid mode. What does it mean? It means that our 40 million people in Morocco, they get their SIM cards and then they need to top it up. And usually they top it up from the local no-name independent grocery stores that are around the corners. So these grocery stores are the distributors of the telecom operators. In Morocco, we have 3 telecom operators. So the way it works is they usually have scratch cards that you come to them, you pay for, they scratch the card and they give you the number that you have to enter. It's a difficult process because it requires logistics, it requires investments. So we came up with this digital solution that allows the grocery store to have one single mobile app in which he selects the telecom operator you are asking for, and then the amount you want to top up your mobile phone with, and everything is paid digitally. And this is possible because we connected through APIs to the 3 Moroccan telecom operators. And the shopkeepers were very happy to start using us because before they needed 3 working capitals, 1 working capital for each telecom operator. No, with Chari, they don't need any more working capital. Why? Because whenever they need to top up the phone of their clients, they can immediately top up their own wallet with Chari using, for instance, their bank account or their debit card. So that's how it picked up. And we quickly reached up to 20,000 small shops that were using us to basically start distributing our fintech services to the end users.
And you might even say at that point of time, you were not even, maybe you were, but the first product was not really a pure fintech play, right? It was more, okay, the really strong adoption is coming through digitizing the purchase of data calling for the SIM cards. But obviously now you realize, okay, to have that in place, we need to be able to open maybe an account, a virtual account for the merchant. And that, of course, then requires entering the world of financial services.
Indeed, the first use case didn't even require a license because it was just distribution of airtime. But then we realized that these shopkeepers wanted to have their own wallet that was interoperable with the other wallets and the other bank accounts. And for that, we needed a license. So first, before asking for the license, and now I'm answering your second question, at the very beginning, we wanted to ride on the rails of existing banks. So now I'm speaking about 2022, 4 years ago. I went to see many local banks asking about their banking as a service offering, about APIs, about documentation, about sandboxes. And
how did that go?
Back at that time, things have changed in the meantime. But back in 2022, I felt like I was speaking in Chinese with them and nobody was really understanding what was my needs. That's when I realized, given that myself, I have been following your newsletters and what is happening in Europe, I have seen what people such as Solaris Bank have been doing in Germany or Trésor in France. And I knew service existed in other countries, but unfortunately wasn't existing in Morocco. That's what has given me the idea to go see the Central Bank of Morocco and discuss with them how I could get what we call a financial institution license in order to operate it myself as an operator for my small grocery stores, but at the same time, in order to bundle it through a sandbox and give it to potential startups, fintechs, or even corporates willing to do embedded fintech.
Was the regulator supportive of that? I mean, obviously, it seems like they were at the end of it, at least, because it worked out for you. But was it a lot of convincing from your end? I'm not sure how the landscape is in Morocco, like new licenses being distributed typically, especially when it's VC-funded companies. When the first one, it's a bit harder than maybe for the fifth or sixth one.
I think every central bank in the world wants to build, at the end of the day, a kind of fintech ecosystem. And the central banks have their own KPIs and they have their own regulator called the GAFI. And among their KPIs, there is what we call financial inclusion. So, of course, central bank is very supportive of any initiative that would trigger and foster financial inclusion. And this was what we were proposing. One, Chari helping the small shopkeepers become financially included, and then the small shopkeepers being ambassadors to convince end users also to use digital financial services. That was offering number one. And offering number two, it was Chari is a tech company with a tech team, and the ambition is to get the license to build in-house a core banking system that then can be offered to other users, being themselves distributors. And as we speak, we have among our clients, some of them are also helping us do financial inclusion.
Interesting. Then coming to the question, why did you decide to build so much of the technology in-house? I mean, obviously, for some parts, it might not been, there is, let's say, a local version required for you to operate, and maybe it wasn't available. But I'm sure bits and parts you could have also sourced from providers, maybe not even from Morocco, like I'm thinking about like core banking provider. I guess there would have been other options as well. Why the choice to build everything in-house?
It's a very good question. And for that, you have to remember my background. I'm coming from the B2B e-commerce environment in which unit economics were not there and margins were very. So I was afraid to start a new business with fintech and end up being in the exact same situation as the e-commerce one, which is a situation in which the more I grow, the more I spend money. And when you start using third-party suppliers, core banking provider, these guys obviously charge you a setup fee, but then a maintenance fee. And sometimes some of them even provide you with a SaaS platform in which they get their cut on every single transaction. And then you have to add up on top of this, of course, the cost of the processing, the cost of the licensing, the cost of the integration, and so on. And as you may imagine, the payment models are based on volumes, and you need to get quite big before starting to make money. Unless you find a way to build yourself in-house your technology. So at the end of the day, you don't have to pay anyone else than you on every single transaction. And that's exactly what we've been doing. Some people may think that we are crazy, and indeed, it did delay our go-to-market. But the good news is that today we are fully autonomous and independent, and therefore we are very agile and nimble. So whenever there is a new regulation or whenever we want to develop a new feature, we are very fast. So if I had to do it again, I would definitely make the same decision and develop in-house. So in-house, we have our core banking system. We've built our own gateway, our own card management system, our own merchant management system. We even process ourselves the transactions. We've bought the HSM, we've developed the POS server. We've done everything in-house, which is, I believe, definitely was the right decision to make.
Impressive. And I guess from my perspective, it's probably after you achieved that and you can leverage the benefits, it's an easy sentence to say, like it was definitely the right decision. I'm just like looking back at the moment when you get started and made the decision, okay, we built all of this in-house, an industry where you have not spent so much time in building everything from scratch, not understanding how many delays, how many issues, how many challenges you will face. You don't know the answer yet to. So I guess at that point of time, it might look more promising to use a solution off the shelf. While of course, I mean, we also know You mentioned the name of Solaris already here in Germany. I remember also them a couple of years ago when they made the transition from, I think, a provider for core banking to their own core banking solution. And we'll touch on your banking as a service offering in a bit, of course, as well. But for them, I think it was pretty much the same thing where they said, like, look, whenever we go to pitch our providers that we rely on, they basically provide the floor pricing. We cannot below that because we would be losing money on every transaction, on every deal. That's not possible. So we always have to charge their price plus our price on top. And obviously, very often per account price means you are a little less flexible in offering a pricing to your customers. And obviously, when you build this in-house, you can be a lot more flexible. Maybe another 10, 20 accounts don't really create so much more cost. So that can also be reflected. And your sales team has more flexibility.
Indeed, we've met with the guys with the HPS that has power cards. And of course, when we saw what they had, it was like buying a Ferrari. But sometimes you can't just afford it. And that's why we built in-house not a Ferrari, but a Renault. And we start with the Renault, and the Renault is taking us where we want to go.
Nice analogy. As you mentioned, you also provide your infrastructure to third parties. So if you take a recap, you started as B2B e-commerce, then you decided to offer fintech services, which mainly still targeted the same customer base. Then at a later point of time, you also decided, okay, this technology that we're building in the financial service space, we're also offering to third parties. Without putting numbers on it, but what is your personal focus between, like, let's say, these three activities, B2B e-commerce platform, fintech offering for the merchants, or the banking as a service offering?
Each one of the business models has its own advantages. Remember, we are still a VC-backed startup. I should have started with this, but in 2020, when we started, we got funded by a few investors, and then we went to Y Combinator, where we got accelerated and then got some spotlight on us that allowed us to get money from very good investors, among which, by the way, a German investor called Rocket Internet, that you've obviously know.
I've heard about them, yes.
But we also have American investors such as Plug and Play, such as Endeavor, such as Global Founders Capital. We also have a French investor called Orange Ventures, and so on. And these guys have been backing us for the last years. And as we speak today, the banking as a service model is for us a way to monetize our rails. So the costs are fixed costs. So it's a marginal revenue for us. So the banking as a service is already profitable because, again, it's additional revenue streams that comes on top of what we have. And then the other business model that is equipping the shopkeepers with our solutions is a way for us to keep growing fast, to raise TPV, and to stay an investable company so we can get to the right size to become a profitable company. So as we speak, as I told you earlier, we are already equipping 20,000 shops with our bank accounts. We've also recently acquired a retail operating system that is today allowing us to equip 2,200 shops with our own POS management system. We also have a credit book app that is being used by 30,000 shops. So we are building a real fintech ecosystem in Morocco, and this requires a lot of funding and, of course, long time to get to the right size. And in parallel, obviously, we are making the most of our infrastructure to opening it to other potential users.
Can you maybe share some examples of some of the companies who are using your banking as a service infrastructure? I mean, maybe just like highlighting what kind of financial products they're taking from you and in what industries are operating and what they're offering to their clients exactly.
Yes, of course. So I'll give you one example that everybody knows because you in Europe are big fans of ride hailing. So there is, of course, Uber that everybody knows, but then there is the challenger being Bolt, which is a brand I love. Whenever I go to Europe, I do use Bolt. So Bolt expanded to Morocco, and obviously they needed embedded fintech for what they call the driver flow and the rider flow. When the driver gets paid, he needs to cash out his money. So through Chari rails, a driver that is using Bolt can go to a network of around 10,000 shops in Morocco to get his money in cash out of his wallet that is provided by Chari. And same for the rider flow. You want to be paying using local debit cards, and Chari is the payment gateway behind the solution. So this is a good example of a foreign startup willing to expand to Morocco and needing a local banking as a service to provide it with the solutions to digitize the payment flows with its stakeholders.
Interesting. And how do you find these customers in the local market? I mean, do you have let's say, a sales team who's going out and reaching out to potential customers? I mean, we know it here in Europe. You mentioned a couple of banking as a service provider names who have basically their own teams who obviously are there for the inbounds, but also reach out to interesting software companies and trying to pitch them the benefits of embedded finance. How does that work for you?
So we have a few ways of doing our go-to-market. One of them is we subsidize the local acceleration program. There is one called Morocco FinTech Accelerator, in which we are the banking as a service supporting the program. So all the startups that get into the acceleration program get free access to our solutions, and then they pay as you go, the more they grow. Then we've written a white paper with Deloitte that has shared with the Deloitte customers for them to better understand what is embedded fintech and how it can help them digitize their flows. And then obviously we have an internal sales team who identify the best use cases, and to be fully transparent, we get our, I'll say, ideas from what is happening in Europe, and then we reach out to local players to show them what could be done. And this is how we end up signing our existing users.
And obviously, that's a pretty smart move. I mean, arguably, we're doing this here in Europe as well, either looking at other European countries, maybe sometimes looking to the UK, maybe sometimes even to the US or completely other countries, continents. Not everything is obviously always copy-paste, and you cannot do it all the time. But I think if you understand and if you can show something, I think this is all the most important part. I think telling somebody what they can do is one thing, but showing them one company which is somehow similar who's doing something is a lot more credible.
Yeah, myself, I love to say that when you are building in, of course, when you are in the Silicon Valley, you can afford to do innovation because you are getting access to the best talents, to a lot of funding and so on. But when you are in a developing country, of course, you won't be inventing the next SpaceX. However, your innovation is coming from what I call myself adaptation. And what does it mean? It means that you see what is happening in other countries that are a little bit more evolved than your country, and you just use it as a crystal ball. So you travel, you see what is happening today in Southeast Asia, and you feel that is coming to Morocco in a few years. But obviously you just copy past. You need a little bit of adaptation, and this adaptation is what I call myself the innovation. Now, it reminds me a great use case that I would like to share with you. Remember, I just told you that we acquired recently a retail management system startup or a POS management system startup, mainly because we saw that this guy's business model was only to offer a SaaS platform to their retailers, and they were making money through a monthly subscription for the usage of their technology. And we realized that if we buy them, we could basically integrate our fintech services within their retail operating system, so we could bring an additional revenue stream, which is a cut on every single transaction. And this is exactly what we've been doing. Today, you spoke about Toast earlier. So we are the Toast of Morocco, and it comes with a tool to handle your sales, but also a bank account so your transactions lands immediately on your system. And this is how we could raise the average revenue per customer.
Interesting. We did mention a couple of times the European banking as a service providers. And when we're looking at the providers here in Europe, they obviously have one major benefit, which is called the European Union and passporting of licenses. So while not every provider, any banking as a service provider, they can expand through this passporting quite easy in other countries. Of course, we all know local IBANs and stuff is not part of that. There's still some more heavy lifting required, but basic offering is quite easy, in quotation mark, being passported from one country to another. Obviously, you're based in Morocco, and as far as I know, you cannot passport your license anywhere else, so it's a strong focus on the local market. But how do you look at this? I mean, obviously, this is how the market is, and are you also thinking about potentially expanding to other markets, acquiring other licenses, going into other markets, or is it it rather focusing on this one market and finding additional revenue streams from other sources?
It's a very good point. I know that you guys, whenever you get a license in one of the 26 countries in Europe, you can passport it to other countries. And I have seen BaaSes from Germany having clients in Europe, in France, and that's great. Unfortunately, in Morocco, the central bank only covers Morocco. So when you get the license, it's only in Morocco. That being said, in other African countries, they have, so let's take West Africa, for instance. These guys have one central bank for 6 countries. It's called UMOA. You apply for a license in Abidjan, for instance, in Ivory Coast. It allows you to operate also in Dakar, in Senegal, for instance. And this is why, as Chari, and because we got the license in Morocco, it put us in a situation in which we are quite credible to ask for a license in this region of the world. So we've already applied. It may take time because, as you imagine, in Africa, administrative processes takes always longer than in countries. But we are on our way. Our ambition is to end up getting the license. So we'll be able, of course, to expand our offering to also West Africa. But in the meantime, we are focusing on Morocco, and we believe that there is definitely a huge market to seize. And we would love to keep building services for local clients, but also for foreign clients that are willing to expand to Morocco.
And I guess that's a fair point, right? I mean, if you're a banking as a service provider in Europe where you can target 20 plus countries with one license, yes, again, maybe some local variations necessary, but still you can address a lot of them at the same time, then you can very likely just a banking as a service provider, just in quotation mark. But when you come to countries where it's only one country, one license, and maybe there's not even at the beginning so many potentially companies out there who want to use you, then maybe your model in quotation mark of being enablers, banking as a service, but also have the B2B super app, including with fintech features, makes it a lot more likely to succeed because you're not only purely relying on the revenue from banking as a service, you're building it from all the angles, right?
Exactly. When you are in a relatively small market such as Morocco, and your license is only functional in Morocco, then the only way you have to survive is to be at the same time banking as a service and at the same time an operator. So many investors or stakeholders keep telling me you should choose one model and focus on it. And they are right when they are in bigger countries. But again, when you are in developing countries, you always have to find solutions to find the money where it is.
Of course. And maybe coming to the end, but I still want to ask this question. You mentioned Bolt as the European company that came to Morocco and then used your infrastructure. Maybe not specifically for Bolt, but when you see generally European companies or let's say international companies expanding to Morocco, is there something, I know it from my personal experience, European companies expanding to the US or to other markets, it's kind of not always like arrogant, but sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And very often you have to pay a nice price in quotation mark to get started in a market and you learn something on the go. Is there something you would say like is really important for international companies coming to Morocco? Is there something that many companies potentially even underestimate?
As I told you, because we went through Y Combinator, through Endeavor and Few Acceleration Program, we also did the Visa Acceleration Program. It allowed me to get in touch with many amazing founders around the world who have built amazing startups and scale-ups around the world. And I realized that many of them were in fact very opportunistic in the sense that of course they had their own strategy, but when they were facing a great opportunity, they were trying to seize it. So that was basically my job, was to find a way to make the fintech ecosystem of Morocco become attractive. And that's why I decided with my team to build many material, including business cases, market studies, that I started sharing with many contacts and seeing who could potentially be willing to come. And we could actually convince a few of them. And then we realized that many of them were sometime using middlemen or middle companies when they wanted to expand. And why? Because when you want to be global, it's always difficult to have a counterpart in each country. So what they do, they usually work with companies that are orchestrators checkout.com through Process Out, and they ask you to get connected to Process Out, and themselves they only connect once to Process Out. So this is how you basically get these global merchants or global clients. It's by connecting to their existing middlemen.
Interesting. Thanks, Ismael. It was really interesting. I think there's a lot more in your story, of course, to unpack, but maybe we'll do that another time. If I missed a question, listeners, let me know. Maybe we can pick it up another time. Ismael, if there's anybody out there who wants to learn more, maybe even a European company or international company that wants to expand to Morocco and wants to learn more about you, what's a good way to get in touch with you and your team?
Yeah, please, if anyone is listening to us and has an amazing, successful business model working well in Europe, and is thinking of expanding to Africa, start with Morocco and start with Chari. We can provide you everything you need to start very quickly. So we have a digital onboarding actually that you can find BaaS.ma, so bankingasaservice.ma, where you will see all our offering plus our digital onboarding. You can even find our APIs, you can get access to our sandbox, and obviously we can help you with any administrative process you may need. And also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I try to answer all the messages I receive.
I saw you have over 75,000 followers, so there might be maybe a little bit time for the people who reach out to you via LinkedIn until you can reply.
I can also share my WhatsApp number with all your readers. I know that all of them are experts, and I'll be happy to discuss on WhatsApp or over the phone with any one of your readers. And I am also one of them, and as I told you, I am a big fan.
Perfect. Thank you, Ismael. Last and very final question. Only makes sense maybe for the people who are watching us on YouTube and not just listening on Spotify, but you're wearing a hoodie with Kodak film on there. What was the intention here wearing that one today?
It was a gift from my brother, and I think the message behind is if you want to thrive, you need to keep remembering companies such as Kodak that didn't realize that you need to keep innovating in order to survive. So wearing this hoodie, let me remember that innovation is very important to keep growing.
Amazing. Nice final words here on the podcast. Again, thank you, Ismael, for sharing your insights, and until next time.
Bye. Thank you again, Lars.
Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, make sure to follow the Embedded Finance Review podcast in your favorite podcasting app. And if you know somebody with an interesting embedded finance story to tell, please let me know. Until next time.